Hello and welcome to the Wakpadan Bassett Creek Oral History Podcast, where our guests discuss ways that they and other indigenous peoples have lived, worked, and played in the Wakpadan watershed for thousands of years. This project was created in Minnesota Makoche, or Minnesota, the traditional and contemporary homelands of the Dakota people. The project was co-led by Dr. Casey Keeler and Crystal Boyd, with support from community partners. More information is included at the end of this episode. On behalf of everyone who contributed to this project, thank you for tuning in.
So good morning. I am here with Brad Blackhawk for the Wakpadan Bassett Creek Oral History Project. Thank you for joining me today, Brad.
Hainepi in Karagiwi in Ho-Chunk or Hihaniwashte in Dakota. Good morning.
To begin, I had a conversation with your brother yesterday, who was also so generous with his time, and he shared a little bit about your family and how you grew up in Crystal. So I'm excited to hear your experiences today as a Native person living in the Twin Cities as well. So do you want to share a little bit about your family arriving to Crystal and where you are now in the East Metro?
Mm-hmm. So I was born in Albert Lea, and my mother and father were just getting out of high school. And my dad quickly got into college in Mankato, where all the rest of my brothers and sisters were born. And then we moved, as soon as he graduated, after I was about, I suppose 6 years old or so, we moved to a place called Renville, Minnesota. Stayed there for a few years where he was a teacher there. And then after that, he got a job at roughly about 1969, 68 at North High School in Minneapolis. And we moved to Crystal. Mm-hmm. And there we resided until I was totally grown up and moved out of the house, probably when I was about 18 or so. And then on my own, throughout the area, I lived, my whole life, basically, everywhere. And, in our days when we were young, we stayed outside all day and all night, and every time we came home for dinner and basically did a lot of things, and we were always fishing or doing something, outside. And that way we discovered a lot of different things, a lot of different areas. And that's the way we lived. And I went to school, Cooper High School, New Hope, graduated, started college at the University of Minnesota, but never finished, just kind of gave it up because I, quickly enough got a family and then needed to work for money, and I got a job. And here I am, ready to retire.
Can't come soon enough.
Right.
So you mentioned fishing as a youngster. Did you fish at all in the area around Crystal, any of the lakes there?
Oh yeah, we would go out to Eagle Lake, and we'd go out to Medicine Lake. And if I remember correctly, I can't remember where Bassett Creek starts at, but I can't remember.
But it kind of starts at Medicine Lake.
Does it?
Yep.
Yeah, I kind of thought so, but we used to follow it, a lot, and down, because back in those days when we were kids, we were allowed to spear, suckers, and we knew we couldn't spear northerns and stuff like that, but we did it anyways, and we brought them home, and stuff like that to eat, and Mom always liked it when we brought fish home because it was added to, what we had and stuff like that. So we learned at a young age how to, clean fish and that kind of stuff. And then I learned how to, hunt with all my friends, that I grew up with. We were all interested in hunting and fishing and all that. So basically I've done that my whole life, provided. I mean, I still have deer meat from last year in the freezer, so we got to finish that up before we can go hunting again this year, So.
Do you still go fishing?
Oh yeah, we were just fishing last weekend. I ate a lot of fish. I caught some walleye and some northerns and a lot of sunfish, and we cleaned them all and ate them. It was good, delicious. I love it.
Do you fish in the Twin Cities or do you go up north?
Usually go up north. It's just a lot of more, access up there. We got friends who have land on a lake, and we just parked our RV up there for the time being, and we go up there, every weekend and stuff like that.
That sounds nice. My husband likes to go fishing, and we have a daughter. She's almost 16 months old, and he taught her to say walleye. So now she walks around and says walleye, walleye, walleye.
Yeah.
But we go up north to Dead Lake, which is near Ottertail. Our family does that every last week of July, so we have that coming up. So I'm excited.
Yeah, this is on the Leech Lake Reservation we go to.
Okay. Yeah, my husband, it was interesting talking to your brother yesterday. So my husband is his family's Catholic. Mm-hmm. And his dad has an RV on Leech Lake outside of the reservation. So he'll go fishing with his dad there at Leech Lake, usually once a summer as well. But then I always give him crap about, the reservation and removal and all of that stuff.
Yeah, it's coming back. I talked to young people out there that are coming up that are becoming lawyers, and native students becoming lawyers and working on acquiring land back.
Right. Yeah.
A lot of leases and stuff are finally up. 100-year leases are finally up, and the tribe's taking that land back.
Right. They're in the position to be able to. Yeah.
People are upset about it, because they had to give up basically land that they stole a long time ago, their families or their descendants, took from a long time ago. And fortunately, the Leech Lake, they had leases that they had, for the areas that they lived in. And some of these leases were 100-year leases, when they finally come up, and so they're not renewing these leases, they're just taking the property, but, so that creates a big fight between a lot of people,
Yeah.
So there's a real need for lawyers and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like the reverse of what happened during removal, right?
Yep.
So it's good for Native communities, but I understand the struggle. But yes, we need good lawyers, good Native lawyers.
Yep. Getting a taste of their own medicine.
Yeah, I don't want to be too negative, but yes, I agree. Karma.
Yeah.
And I think about places, around Leech Lake, the development of like cabins and like the wealth, places like Walker, and all of that was stole from Native people.
No.
And Leech Lake in particular, the reservation there, where so much of the actual land is occupied by also, the Chippewa National Forest. So how much is actually, in Native hands is just such a small percent. So it's good to see this movement and land back.
Yep.
Absolutely. You mentioned that you attended school at Cooper in New Hope. Do you recall participating in any education programming or getting any Indian history in school in the K through 12 curriculum?
No, never. None. As a matter of fact, we had to learn from our parents basically, and all the relatives, because, we spent our summers going back and forth to the res, and stuff like that, and going to powwows and stuff. Ever since I was young, I was just looking at some pictures when I was like 3 years old, fully dressed in regalia and dancing at the powwow, and remembering all that, and then there was a time when I turned 16, my parents got divorced, and I kind of like lost touch with Native culture because my dad kind of disappeared out of the picture, and we were kind of left on our own. And so, I didn't get down to the res very often anymore, or go to ceremonies anymore and stuff like that. So I kind of lost out on a lot of culture and stuff throughout my younger years, but quickly enough found my way back, About 35 years old, I finally figured out, that, I straightened up and sobered up and stuff like that and got. To where I was supposed to be.
Mhm.
So nowadays it's, we participate, and I never thought I'd be anyone in my life. On my dad's deathbed, he told me that I would be the next spiritual leader of our family. And I said, I didn't think that that was true. And it's that way today. He told me that it was going to happen. He said, you're not going to know it. You're not going to feel it. You're not going to understand it, but it's going to happen just like that. And he was right. It happened.
That's amazing how that works.
Yep.
And that you're able to provide that for your family and community too.
Yep. I was the oldest in the family, so I had that responsibility, and they call it the Kunu, the firstborn son. It's Kunu, Hena, Haga, the 3, 4, and then 5, 6, all the way down, and there's a certain role that the Kunu takes, and was born with.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently I didn't know that, and it happened, it just happened like that,
Mm-hmm.
and I carry it that way nowadays, and I take it seriously, and I try to help as many people as I can. My dad always told me, there's people going to ask you things. They're going to ask something of you, and they're going to want you to do certain things and ceremonies and stuff like that. You can't say no, you have to say yes. I'll help you, So that's what I learned long ago, especially for your family,
Right. So do you participate in a lot of cultural activities in the area in the Twin Cities? Do you go back to the reservation in Nebraska, or do you find yourself coming to Wisconsin?
Both. I go to Wisconsin. We go all over the place. I've been to ceremonies up around Leech Lake. My brother-in-law, Larry Aiken, just recently passed away a few years back. And, participated in funerals and many different, things, sweats, ceremony, other ceremony, Native American church services, ceremonies that way.
Mm-hmm.
Conducting, meetings, prayer meetings, so on and so forth, Have my own church. I have my own teepee, my own 32-foot teepee and all that, and we carry it around sometimes, and we put up different meetings and stuff for different reasons, funerals, baptisms, naming ceremonies, stuff like that. So I can do that, I learned how, and that's what I do. I'm a very big participator in Indian education programs here around the area. I've been hired many different times. My longest tenure is with Osseo School District 279, Osseo Maple Grove. I've been a male dance instructor there for probably, I don't know, 10 to 12 years now. And, and I was the parent advisory committee chairperson over at the Mounds View School District, 621, and been there for probably the last, ever since my daughter graduated in 2019, I was active there, but, kind of phased out of the picture after she went on, last one was out of school, I'm 65 years old, and I just, my kids are finally got to school, and I have real old kids and young kids and lots of grandkids.
So, you're in Matamidi now, but
No, I'm in Mounds View.
Mounds View. Okay.
Yeah.
So the kids, did they all go through the Mounds View School District?
Yeah, my second set of kids. My first set of kids went through Rockford, mostly the Rockford area out there, Wright County, Crow River area.
Okay.
And they grew up and they stayed there basically. And then I got remarried as well, and I've been here in Mounds View for 22 years now, probably.
So the kids who went through the Mounds View School District, they participated in an Indian education program then?
Yes. Yep. That was all new to me back in those days. I have a son that's 30, and he went through the program there when he was in like 5th grade, and he didn't understand what it was either, because, they took him out of class, and he was kind of surprised what they were doing, and they tried to get him to participate, but he was active in our own culture here at home,
Mm-hmm.
And he said, hey, this white lady took me out of class, and they talked to me about Indians and stuff like that. And he said, I told her more than she knows. That's what he said,
Mm-hmm.
And then my daughter kind of was the same way too, and I used to then through all that, that's how I got to be able to, go over to the school and say, hey, look, my son here and my daughter, they've been approached by Indian education and stuff. And some of these things that they're learning, they already know that, they already know these things, and they could teach the class if they wanted to, and stuff like that. But that's how I started getting active in there. I talked to school, classes, and talk about the true history and stuff like that. And,
right.
How it affected us, and how we kind of have to live in two worlds, so to speak, in this day and age,
right.
And how that happens,
Yeah. So I grew up in Coon Rapids, and that was the Anoka Hennepin School District.
Yep.
And I graduated in 2001, and I remember participating in Indian education, kindergarten through 12th grade.
Mm-hmm.
And when I finished my bachelor's degree here at the University of Wisconsin, I went back and I actually worked for their Indian education program. But I think a very similar story is that, there's a lot of Native students who are really connected with their culture, really knowledgeable. And something for me that was difficult was observing a lot of the microaggressions between like the teachers and administrators in the schools and the Native students and family, and just, offhand comments that are totally inappropriate, that are racist.
Yep.
And that's really what kind of encouraged me to go to grad school, is to think about that history, and why, when we think about Native people in suburbs, we just assume that they're so assimilated that they're white and they know nothing. And a lot of damage can be done. And through this project, I've really been thinking a lot about, and Indian education, as you mentioned, is pulling Native students out of classes when they should be getting that education in the classroom. All students should be getting that accurate history, not a whitewashed history that we're so familiar with.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's and it's that microaggression you're talking about. I always used to associate it with just ignorance, because I didn't think that people were educated enough to know. So I just let it go a lot of times. I didn't say anything. I'd always say, you know what, you just don't know.
Right.
You're excused,
Right.
I understand that, where you're coming from and all that, but your thoughts and ideas and everything are wrong,
Right. That's something I still think about. So here I am at the University of Wisconsin, and I teach an intro class, Intro to American Indian Studies, and it's about 300 students. So they're all adults, right? They're 18, 19. And I say, I understand, there's some ignorance because you don't get that education in K through 12.
Yep.
But at what point is it like willful ignorance, right? Like you're coming from Wisconsin or Minnesota, these places that have pretty significant Native populations. So at some point you choose not to learn that history, and you choose not to engage. Right. So you don't get like that free pass, past the age of like 8 or something.
And, because I was the chairman of the parent advisory committee in 621, I got on these other panels and these other groups about curriculum and stuff like that in schools, and how, and for years and years, I just begged the school district to get educated on different curriculums for history and stuff like that. To no avail, because they just didn't have time or effort, or didn't want to. I don't know what, but, I begged them, to just change the curriculum and teach the true history, and, get it involved. And I mean, sometimes there's state statutes that say this is what you should be teaching, and stuff like that. And, and a lot of times they don't even do that,
Right. Right. In Wisconsin, since I've been here, I've learned that we have something called Act 31, but it's actually an unfunded mandate where specific points in the K through 12 curriculum, all students are supposed to get Native centered education, whether that be history or the communities that are here today, but teachers don't have the curriculum. So it's something that's like, it's a law, but it's not fulfilled. And there's no funding behind it. So there's really no teeth. So how do you make that change? And again, being in higher education, literally every student I teach is like, oh my gosh, why didn't we learn this in K through 12? So students are also really eager for this kind of history as well. So it does require a whole shift in how we teach and what that curriculum looks like.
That's right.
So growing up in Crystal, or where you are now in Mounds View, do you know any other Native families, or did you know any other Native families in Crystal?
Yeah, when I was in school, there was one other Native family in the school where we were. Out of all the 800 kids in our class, I think, there was just two of us families that were Native people, us and Desjardins, and Delmer Desjardins was my age, and then he had a dad and uncles and stuff. Robert, Patrick Desjardins. Patrick Desjardins was a famous artist. That was his father, Delmer's father. And so we knew him. I knew him. We hung out a little bit, and not too much, but we hung out, and we were trying to get, I guess, if you will, assimilated, I guess, because, we had these different backgrounds, and, going to school where we were, there wasn't much for anything as far as, Native cultures go. You had to get that from your own homes, So, we'd talk about different things, we're going to the powwow this weekend down in Prairie Island, or we're going over here to the powwow up in Leech Lake, or whatever, wherever it was happening, And so, but I was lucky enough, I was a dancer all my life and stuff like that. And I participated in powwows until, I will continue to dance until I can't dance anymore, And, my age is different now. I'm 65 years old, and it's hard to dance like I want to, and because my legs are hurting, I got 2 knee replacements, stuff like that. I got a hip that needs looking at, and stuff like that. So it's kind of hard to dance, but you know what? I still do it anyways. I don't care. It's worth the pain.
Yeah. So you had your family in Crystal. Did you have any other family in the Twin Cities area growing up or now?
No, not really. Most of our relatives, they stayed on the res. Some of them tried to move off and, be part of, we had friends and family around the area, like St. Paul, the Green Crow family we used to hang out with, and some of the other ones too, Dave Walker and his family, they were all over in St. Paul. Claremont's there in St. Paul. Everybody had, everyone that made it, off the res and was functioning in society here, we all knew who they were, and we all knew where they were, and we all, participated in things together. Everybody had their, we'd have ceremonies over at Claremont's all the time. We used to go over there. They used to have, Lenten services. They used to have, different birthday celebrations and stuff like that. And we'd all go over there, That's how we knew everything, That's how we learned everything,
Right.
So, yeah, we had a lot of different ones. Now that I think about it, yeah, back in the days when,
And all these families that you mentioned, they're Winnebago out of Nebraska?
Well, they have Ho-Chunk, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they have Ho-Chunk or Winnebago. Okay. We always used to be just one. There was Winnebago tribe in Wisconsin, Winnebago tribe in Nebraska, and then the Wisconsin around, I don't know, I think 79 or something, they changed their name to the Ho-Chunk Nation. So it used to be Winnebago tribe of Wisconsin and Winnebago tribe of Nebraska. We were all the same. Of course, it is, but You know, there's some people that say that, you know, just because of the area that we were from, you know, like in Nebraska, Nishochachi, that was a different dialect, but it's not really. You know, they tried to tell me that there was old people, language teachers that used to tell me that there was a different dialect for this and that, you know. But there's only just a very few words that are different, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I think things like butter is one of them, you know, that they talk about, you know, how it's said and how they say it over there in Wisconsin, how we say it down there in Winnebago, you know, it's different, but it's pretty much the same, really, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like this is a history I need to learn more about too, is um, the separation of the Ho-Chunk in Wisconsin and the Ho-Chunk in Nebraska, and thinking about the role of the U.S.-Dakota War as well.
Yep.
Awesome.
So if you look at the U.S.-Dakota War, you know, I mean, that 1862, when they had that Removal Act, you know, the removal of all Dakota people from the borders of Minnesota, our excellent Governor Ramsey, you know, put that out there and said, you know, this is what it's going to be. All Dakotas will be banished from the borders. And then, well, the Ho-Chunk people were left right there on the river in the same area that the Dakota were. And then we ended up, you know, getting shot and killed because we were left there. So we just basically had to leave because, you know, there was so much of that going on. It was legal to shoot and kill Indians, you know, back in those days.
Right, a
and
bounty.
Then, so then a lot of the Ho-Chunk people left because, you know, they lived peacefully among the Dakota people on the river, you know, along the mile. They had like a 10-mile strip on each side of the river, all the way on the Minnesota River, all the way up to the South Dakota and all the way down to, you know, Mankato. And that's where a lot of the Ho-Chunk people ended up. You know, that's why my dad lived, you know, went to Mankato and stuff like that when he went to college. And because he knew the area, he knew what, you know, our relatives went through there and stuff like that. So we learned all that, you know, and that was long ago, you know, when things like that happened. You know, the total, you know, all the Ho-Chunks were in Wisconsin there. The history goes from Red Banks at, you know, at the Green Bay area, all the way Lake Michigan, all the way down to Illinois. And then we were removed from there over to Long Prairie, Minnesota, down to Freeborn County, down there where a reservation was, kind of like by Mankato, Albert Lee area, kind of like that way. And then finally out to Crow Creek. And then the nocturnal migration from that Crow Creek area, people would just go down the river, and that's where we ended up on the Missouri River, down on the reservation we have now is next to the Omaha reservation. The Omaha Indians were kind enough to give half their reservation up for us. So that's how come we got there. And then, you know, the others that migrated back to Wisconsin, you know, they've formed their own, you know, areas and stuff like Black River Falls and, you know, Wittenberg, all those areas where, you know, they live. And now they're getting kind of like land back, and you know, there's reservations now and stuff like that. So Wisconsin Dells area, the Dells area, you know, that's big too. That's a big Ho-Chunk areas there.
Tomah.
Yeah, Tomah, yeah.
I have the good fortune of working with two Ho-Chunk graduate students, Kendra Greendeer and Molly Palat. So I've been able to learn a lot from them that they've really generously shared with me. I'm also thinking about another woman, Amy Lone Tree. She is Ho-Chunk but grew up in the Twin Cities, and now she's a professor out in UC Santa Cruz in California.
I probably know her dad, probably Jacob Lone Tree, and some of those are her dad, I bet. I'm just thinking, yeah. Because I know a lot of relatives. I got, you know, we have green deer relatives in our family too.
Yeah,
so, you know,
there's a lot of green deers.
Yeah, a lot of Blackhawks too.
Yeah, there are a lot of Blackhawks. Yeah. So, for work, you're working for the City of Minneapolis now. Have you always worked in the Twin Cities area, or did you ever have to travel for work?
No, pretty much. I went to college. I started college shortly after high school. I think I waited a year, and then about 1977, I started going to college, and then quickly enough got tired of it, and you know, I didn't listen to what my dad said. He was iron fist with me about going to college. You know, you need to go to college. You need to go to college, and I wasn't ever, you know, one of those kids that could sit still in school. I got kind of punished a lot because I moved around a lot, you know, and I wasn't able to pay attention a lot. So, you know, I didn't like school, you know. And I tried and tried, and I honestly, I tried hard to do it, but I couldn't do it. I'd rather go to work. And so I found that, you know, there was a lot of money to be made in construction work. And so I started that and ended up doing that my whole life. And then in around 1991, I got a job with the City of Minneapolis because of my construction background. Soon enough became an inspector, soon enough became the lead inspector. And now I've been running that outfit for probably I've worked there 30 years. I'll be 31 years in February.
Nice.
So I've been there a long time.
Yeah. So working with the City of Minneapolis, you've gotten to know Bassett Creek.
Yeah, a lot of Bassett Creek, you know. And I used to know Bassett Creek before that because we used to float the where it comes into the Mississippi. We used to take a canoe upstream and go in because there was a restaurant that you could go and kind of canoe right through, and then you'd come to this opening, and then there would be like a glass area where the people would look down into the creek. It was inside of a box culvert, you know. And sooner, I don't think that restaurant's there anymore, but you know, but that was back in those days. And we used to, because it was a tunnel. It was basically a tunnel. You had to have lights to see anything, you know, because it was inside of a tunnel. They had diverted it so far, you know. And we used to know where it ended, where it daylighted in right over there by Glenwood and I think Second Street North and stuff like there. Yeah, Second Avenue North and Glenwood right there. That's where it goes into the culvert.
Okay.
It's underground the whole way, the rest of the way over to
the river, to the Mississippi.
Yep.
So it was already tunneled kind of in the mid 1970s.
Well, I looked up the Bassett Creek, you know, the records and stuff, and you know that thing periodically through the years, different portions of it. You know, it used to be open, but you know they made it as soon as the city became a city, they started to, you know, divert it into area so it wouldn't meander around, you know, and so it just kind of got its own channel, and you know they would build channels and then they put it inside box culvert pipe is what they call it. Big giant pipe, you know, you could drive a truck through that pipe, you know, but that's how they diverted it. And it's basically a stormwater runoff type of situation.
Right.
There's a lot of storm sewer, that rainwater that, you know, runs down the street.
And it all flows into it.
Yeah, it all flows, then it goes out into the river. But it's an open creek until you get over to, you know, I remember there was beaver there. There was a lot of things. We used to see it back in the day, you know, when we used to kind of hang out around there, you know, because my friends and I, we were into trapping. We'd like to trap muskrats and stuff like that. And, you know, because you used to get like $5 each for a muskrat pelt, you know, back in those days. I don't know what it is now anymore, but I think it's substantially more. But we try to trap beaver and stuff too, and because, you know, they would let you trap nuisance beaver anywhere, anytime, you know. But, you know, we couldn't afford the big traps that they had and stuff, so we tried to snare them and all that stuff, and we never got the hang of it really, so we kind of gave up.
You didn't become wealthy on trapping beaver then?
No.
I'm just pulling up the map of Bassett Creek. So Plymouth Creek is in Plymouth, flows into Medicine Lake, and what flows out of Medicine Lake is Bassett Creek.
Yeah.
So I've learned through this project, through Golden Valley, there's also golf courses on Bassett Creek.
Yeah, it's in fact, I'm supposed to play golf there on Saturday. Brookview Golf Course is the name of the golf course. And last spring I played there, and the river or the creek was just full,
Mm-hmm.
and it happened to be right around May 1st, or pretty close to the 1st of May, and there was just a ton of carp in there. And we were just laughing because we used to shoot with our bows, carp, all the time. So I said, hell with this. I'm going to go home and get my bow. I'm done golfing, I said.
It just like has me thinking of like our treatment of water, right? Like the golf course butts up to it. It flows through people's backyards,
Yep.
Meanders around. And then once it gets to Minneapolis, it's tunneled, and
Yep.
all the wastewater from the streets flow into it before going into the Mississippi River. Just the different ways it's cared for or not cared for.
Right.
One of the other folks I've interviewed, they were telling me about the pollution of Bassett Creek, and they thought that at one point it was kind of like a dump. People would just pour stuff into it.
Yeah, right there by 2nd Street in Glenwood, where it goes into tunnels, nothing. It was all just junkyards over there, and all the runoff that was from those junkyards just ran into that open creek. You know, it would just naturally it was a low area, and and everything, and they didn't have containment efforts to contain any rainwater, so it just ran off.
Right.
And I noticed that from way long ago. I used to notice that.
And I would assume going from like a junkyard too, it's like some pretty bad stuff.
Well, yeah. I mean, you got the oil, and they just tear apart cars and smash them, and and all the fluids and stuff go on the ground, and and they don't have containment. Back in those days, they didn't have any containment, but nowadays it's more regulated, so that
right.
They have to contain that water, and then they have to treat it before it goes into the stuff now. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That's a rules at the city. You can't. There's a lot of different rules about how you handle your water, your rainwater. That's a real issue now. You know what I mean? Right. They have tons and tons. And when people consider building in the city now, you have to present a plan to the city that shows how you're going to contain that rainwater and how you're going to treat it. Because once that rain falls on your property, it becomes your water.
Your responsibility.
And your responsibility to clean it before it goes into anything.
That's so important. I feel like growing up in the Twin Cities, the Mississippi River is just always right there. It's like so central. But for folks who don't live near like a major waterway, it probably isn't something that they have to think about so much. I mean, I'm just thinking, in the Twin Cities, and even here in Madison, you often see near the storm drains, like, don't put anything in here. This flows into this lake or this river or whatnot, like a reminder that's directly where it's going.
Yep. So yeah, that's a big deal nowadays. And there's so many different types of treatment stuff nowadays for rainwater and stuff. They build big tanks, a lot of tanks that they build, and systems for the water to just drain back into the ground and to run off in case it gets full. You know what I mean? So, and then they have to treat it so that all the oils and the garbage and everything separates before it runs off. And then those have to be cleaned out periodically. So the city monitors those,
And that's the city of Minneapolis.
Yep.
So each city, do they have their own regulations?
Pretty much. If you don't take care of your stormwater, they'll charge you money for it.
Oh.
For taking care of it for you.
So what about like a golf course? Do they have
golf courses? I don't know. Golf courses, I think, are kind of exempt. I don't know. Maybe they're not. But the thing is they use so much stuff they use so many chemicals on their grass and stuff that it just automatically washes in. And honestly, everybody hates the creek because you lose your golf balls in there. They would soon not see the creek there. So, everybody gets mad at the creek because as soon as you hit your golf ball and it goes in the creek, you're, what the hell,
They should be better golfers.
Yeah. It just happens, you think you can make it or whatever. And sure as hell, it's just like magnet, for the golf balls. It's the creek or the lake, But yeah, I don't think they really, honestly, I don't think they can, because that creek overflows and it creates great big ponding issues on the fairways of the golf course, and some of the holes have to be altered sometimes in the springtime when it gets that way. Because I noticed that right away when I was golfing that one day, that water was all the way up, way over the banks,
Right.
and just
Because
soaking up everything.
I would assume that, like, the creek itself, but then the larger watershed, and then the golf course is in that watershed. So where does the water go?
I've looked at a lot of the creeks when we were kids, and including Minnehaha Creek. That was a big one coming out of, because we used to watch it when it left Grays Bay, Lake Minnetonka, and then it flows through all the way through Edina and all the way down to Minneapolis, and then to Minnehaha Falls and all that, and the park and everything. We used to follow that river all the time, that little creek, And now here, Rice Creek too. There's Rice Creek right by our house here, and that goes through. It's like Bassett's Creek. It's pretty small, but it's a major waterway, to me, because every year, you get the same thing, that fish come up it, and there's people there fishing, and even though it's so small, there's probably lots of wildlife there.
Right. Hearing you speak about the golf course reminds me of a golf course here in Madison. So maybe just a mile from where I am now, just immediately west of campus, is Blackhawk Country Club. And Blackhawk Golf Course. And I have a colleague who lives just across the road, and one day we went on a walk because she was going to give me a little tour of this area. I'm doing some mapping work with different native places in this community. And in the middle of the golf course, I know nothing about golf, so I'm probably going to use the wrong terms, but in the middle of the golf course, on like two fairways, are Ho-Chunk mounds.
Oh, really?
Yep. And there's Ho-Chunk mounds all around. So I've been thinking a lot about how the mounds are cared for, in terms of, is there a perimeter? Are they mowed? Is there signage? Is there a fence? Things like that. So depending on if the mounds are on, the campus and owned by the university, or if they're in a City of Madison park, or across Lake Mendota is the Mendota State Mental Health Facility. And now thinking about how the golf course manages it. And of course, it's like very well manicured lawn, like the entire green is maybe a half-inch long, but they let the grass on the mound grow to like an inch and a half. So you can kind of distinguish it, but it's very like identifiable. I believe the one that we looked at was a bear. We weren't able to go look at the other one because people were golfing, and I don't think we're like not supposed to walk across the middle of the golf course as non-members, but there's just like a little plaque that says, it's a Ho-Chunk mound and that it's a bear. But I just think about that history and how golfers, thousands, hundreds of golfers maybe walk across it or right past it every day, every week. Yeah.
Yep. They don't even have a clue.
Right. So if you're ever down in Madison, maybe they'll let you play a free round. You can check it out.
Yeah.
So growing up in the Bassett Creek area and being Ho-Chunk, did you ever think about living in a Dakota place?
Well, from my upbringing, when we lived in Renville, when we lived really close to like Granite Falls and Redwood Falls in the Morton area, we knew all about Dakota and Lakota and all those. My dad used to tell us all about it, and then of course I learned and researched and looked about, how, when I was talking earlier about those laws that went into effect in 1862, the removal acts and stuff like that, and how the Ho-Chunk people were left behind, and a lot of us had to, run or get out because, you know, threatened with death. You know, you see an Indian, you get to shoot him, you know, what the hell, you know. So a lot of people left, and, you know, and through that, then, I talk about all of the things, we talked about when I went to school as a young boy. My dad would say, stuff like, Abraham Lincoln was not really a really good president. He was responsible for the largest mass execution in the history of the United States back in those days and all that. And, they hung, and still to this day, it's still stands the same, and I talked to, my daughters and my sons and all that. And, and they felt the same way, and they made sure that people knew about that,
Mm-hmm.
and how that happened and what that history was. And so, we knew, and the Dakota creation story, at that place right by Fort Snelling there, Pedote, all those areas over there are like sacred areas, Pilot Knob Road, and then there's mounds over there. There's Indian Mounds Park and stuff up on the river bluff there. And, there's just tons of areas around here that are all Dakota themed, everything is about it is Dakota, I don't know. We just knew that,
Right.
and I don't know how we knew it, but, my dad we'd go places and see things, and we'd talk about it. And that's what we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we learned. And, thank God for that, and I learned how to, learn that,
Right. Yeah, I feel similarly. So I'm Tuolumne Miwok, which is in California, and Citizen Potawatomi, but my whole family on my mom's side lives on the reservation. My mom was born and raised, and is the first and the only person in her family to leave the community there when her and my dad, who's not native and from North Dakota, got married. So I grew up in the Twin Cities as a native person, but am almost much more familiar with Dakota and Ojibwe history than my own community in California, because it's so small and so far away, and I've never been able to live there. But I feel like as Native people, often I think we see it as a responsibility to know those histories much more so than our non-Native neighbors.
Yep.
Yeah.
The non-Native people think that one Indian, all Indian,
right. We're all the same. Yeah.
And we try to make sure that they know that it's not so,
right.
We're
so kind of on the flip side of that, have you thought about your identity as a Native person living in a predominantly white suburb?
All the time. That's the way I carry myself. I mean, I know that, I've been, I don't know, I guess my dad was, off the reservation, got away, went to school, smart enough to learn and, do well and excel in college and stuff like that, to become a school teacher, only to, through that, being an educator, he was always on that, trying to teach people about Native culture, Native history and stuff like that. So, I've always been that way, because, and I'm only half. My mom's white, my dad's full. And so, and I had, the looks, a lot of people when they're half, they don't, some of them don't look Indian, but just so happens I had, dark skin and long black hair and stuff like that. And so I was always singled out as a Native wherever I went.
Mm-hmm.
You're Indian. They knew it,
Mm-hmm.
So that was always something in my life that I, was proud of. My dad always told me, you got to be proud of it, because you're going to suffer if you're not proud of it. You're Indian, and that's all you're going to be. And my grandma used to say that too. You're nothing else but Indian, she said. That's all you are. And that's how I lived.
Right.
And I used to fight. I used to get beat up. I used to, get chased around because, My parents let my hair grow long. I was a kid with, in the summertime, I'd turn real brown, and then all the white kids would gang up and,
Mm-hmm.
hey, you're Indians, you're this, that, and try to, cut you down and beat you up and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, I've lived that way my whole life, and it's like I said, you live in two worlds, like
Mm-hmm.
almost. When I come home, I feel safe, I feel good, and feel happy. And sometimes when I'm out there, it feels like I have to always watch out, you know,
Yeah.
for myself, because it seems like something's going to happen, sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
walking around my whole life like that, thinking somebody's going to do something to me, or, you know, stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, I think too about what it might have been like to grow up in the Twin Cities in proximity to Minneapolis during the 1970s as AIM was growing too.
Yeah, that was big. I remember that. And I wasn't part of that because, I thought, a lot of that AIM stuff at the beginning kind of looked like they were, not on the right path, so to speak. They were kind of like lawbreakers and, radicals and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad says, watch out for those people, they might, but you know what? After everything's said and done, they did a lot of good, they did a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and I knew a lot of people that were part of AIM. Those were, your, people that really wanted to, do something, really wanted to make it known that, we're Indians and this is what we want and this is what we need and stuff like that. So
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't willing to participate in that because I thought it was too much of a controversy. Sometimes that was my own thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
I could have been member, I could have been, something in that order. I could have been in there too. I could have been over at Wounded Knee. I could have been out there with the rest of them, with my guns and stuff. I was old enough,
Oh,
at that time.
yeah. Yeah. One of the other gentlemen I interviewed, Sid Bean, he's Dakota.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's a bit older than you, but he shared a little bit about his experience in the Twin Cities during that time period too. And as you mentioned, a lot of good came out of that activism.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about housing and Little Earth and stuff like that.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I mean, my wife used to talk about that all the time because she liked to be active in AIM, and her dad basically full-blood Boys Fort Band Ojibwe member. He was adamantly not in favor of the AIM.
Mm-hmm.
He said, "Don't hang around over there." And Samantha used to tell him, that they're doing good things for people. They're doing good things for us, and all that. So he didn't agree, but he was a boarding school era person, where the Indian was taken out of him, and he lost his ability to speak his language. They took it away from him and all that. And fortunately, my dad didn't. He was the same age, but he didn't, get that taken away. He was avoided boarding school and avoided all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
His grandparents raised him, and of course they sheltered him and kept him away from all that stuff. They couldn't find him. They couldn't take him away. Stuff like that. So he remained fluent speaker, all that.
Wow.
Of course, I didn't listen and learn. I should have, taken it up. Where I should have spoke my language.
We offer Ho-Chunk
today,
languages here on campus. We offer Ho-Chunk, and I think we do it virtually if you're interested.
Yeah, I'm interested. I have the, through the Ho-Chunk Nation, which my daughter and my wife are members of, they have that app and stuff on their phones, so they can always, converse.
Yeah, that's such important work. I'm working with a graduate student. She's non-native. Her name is Sarah Lundquist, but her PhD will be in linguistics, and she works with the Ho-Chunk community. So even though she's not native, she has learned Ho-Chunk and speaks it and has done a lot of work in helping preserve it.
Yep. Right.
So I'm excited for her
Yep.
to do the transcriptions for your interview and your brother's, because I think she'll be so excited to hear these Ho-Chunk stories as well.
Yep. Yep.
But I'm so excited to hear and learn more about all the good language work for all tribes.
Yep.
It's so important.
It is.
Speaking of language, Haha Wakpadan is the Dakota name for Bassett Creek. So what do you think about the role of Indigenous languages and place names, particularly in predominantly white settler suburban spaces?
Yeah. So I've been asked that question before. They changed the name of Lake Calhoun to Bade Makaska, and that's the original name it was called. And I think it's a lot of people, I've seen both sides of it. There's a lot of people that don't agree with it, but they're doing all kinds of name changing everywhere nowadays. I mean, they're changing the name of Dite Avenue. Dite was a slave owner according to the history books, and so Dite Avenue now is changed to Cheatham because Cheatham was the first black police chief or black fire chief in the city of Minneapolis for some reason. And all those kind of things are happening all over the place. George Floyd, they're going to probably name a street after him, stuff like that. So that's happening more and more, and I think it's great. I think it's wonderful. I think it's perfect. I think it should be, because the original names are for what it was back when Earth was created. I think about it that way. That's what it's supposed to be called. And in different areas, of course, it's going to be different tribes and different names because we didn't all inhabit the same place at the same time. The Ho-Chunk lived peacefully among the Dakota people before their removal, and so I mean, if you look at, I got a nice CD about some stuff about a reconciliation thing that happened in Mankato with the Ho-Chunk people and the Dakota people and stuff that my dad was a big part of, and they had a reconciliation day and all kinds of stuff down there in Mankato, and because they wanted to recognize that there was Ho-Chunk people there, and so yeah, I'm all for it, naming these things after what they're supposed to be, so that we can hold that history and with us, so that we can be, so much of us we are part of the land. We are, that's our well-being, is being part of the land. All Indians are like that. There's we've forgotten how that is sometimes when we, I call them city Indians, and some of the Indians that live on the res, I call them, because they think differently than the city Indians, because on the res it's it's easy to live there, but it's hard at the same time. You know what I mean?
Right.
You don't have access to a lot of things like they do in the city, and people on the res, they used to not accept me a lot of times because I was half white and I didn't live there. So a lot of my relatives, and a lot of friends and stuff used to tease me and say, you're a city Indian, and you're half white, and, you're not Indian until you live here, stuff like that, So I used to get it from both sides,
Right.
And, here I was totally Indian, and there I was half white,
And now here we are in the suburbs too.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's kind of the way I grew up, and and my dad always said, you have to play the game, and you have to learn how to survive, and you have to, do things equally or better than the white people do. And I found that to be true because, I had to work twice as hard. I had to be, twice as strong. I had to do everything better than everyone else in order to succeed.
Right.
And, I don't think that anymore, but, at that time in my life, I thought that. So I thought I had to be a certain way, you know, I had to be above the rest.
Mm-hmm.
And I was overachiever, you know, I did a lot of the good things, you know, except for school. I used to work harder than anybody. I can still do that. I can, you know, I have a strong work ethic, and I brag about myself sometimes too much, you know, and that's not a good thing either. But, you know, I can do, you know,
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing I can't do. I'm going to put it that way.
Right. And thinking about land acknowledgements, this oral history project, of course, grew out of a land acknowledgement statement. What are your thoughts on land acknowledgement statements broadly? And then after a land acknowledgement statement has been done, what do you see as important and necessary follow-up? So it doesn't just fall flat or become words on a paper.
Well, I think that everyone should acknowledge the fact that this is all Indian land before, you know, before colonization happened, you know, and therefore we should be able to have, reminders to people around this world that, you know, this is how it became. This is where we are now, and this is what it was before. And it wasn't so long ago, you know, it was only a couple hundred years ago. And, you know, and the way that people think, you know, that you know, this land, this is mine, you know, they put up a fence and they say, this is mine, you know, you can't come over here, you can't touch this land over here, you know, this is mine. That's not the way to think, you know, to me, you know, that's not the real way to think. You know, you should be able to, we should all be sharing everything that, you know, is this land has to offer, you know, and live in harmony, and learn how to be environmentally good to the planet, you know, stuff like that. You know, you hear it all the time, but rarely do you see anybody doing anything about it, you know.
Right.
So that's kind of like my thoughts, you know.
Right. Like this whole notion of private property, as you mentioned, like it's my land, this belongs to me. How we're just conditioned to think in those ways. Euro-Americans, our society, it's just so harmful.
Yeah. You can buy things, you know, you can buy a truck, you can buy a house, you can buy everything, you know, you can call it yours if you want, but you can't call the land yours. It's never been yours, and it never will be yours, you know.
Right.
It belongs to the world. It belongs to everyone, you know.
Another woman I spoke to for this project, she was sharing with her perspective on this question, and she was thinking about the environment, land, trees, waterways is a commons, which I thought was really great. A good perspective to think that, you know, we don't own it individually. It's something that's held in common, and that we all need to care for, because the environment is going to be here before us and after us. I liked that perspective too.
That's good. Yep. I agree.
And thinking about the land, and I know we talked a little bit about the pollution that goes into the Bassett Creek itself and the watershed. Is there any advice or feedback you would like to give to those who manage the watershed and surrounding area today?
Well, you know, there's always room for improvement. You know, I mean, no matter how hard you try, you know, there's going to be pollution somewhere or another. And I just think that, they can do more. They can do more to, clean up these waterways and stuff. I mean, it's happening all over the place. I mean, there's a lot of places that rivers are coming back from devastation of pollution, and it can be reversed. They've seen it. We've seen it happen. So that should be focused. That should be all the focus on. I mean, who knows? Someday maybe you might be able to drink the water out of the river. Who knows? But the city of Minneapolis gets their water. I know this because I worked at the water plant. They get their water from the Mississippi River. One of the last cities before the river, goes downstream, that gets their water supply from the Mississippi River. It supplies all of Minneapolis and some suburbs with water, with clean water. because they process it. It's a huge operation. I'd take you up there sometime because you'd like to see it. You know, they clean it, treat it, distribute it, you know, to
Right.
all the people.
That's
And it
such a
comes from the water.
that's such a good reminder too, because I mean, it makes sense, right? But I
Yeah.
think if people thought about every day, you know, whatever you're pouring down the drain, somebody and you are likely drinking at some point,
Mhm.
then people might treat that water differently as well, be
Yep.
more mindful of what they throw out, pour out, let run off.
Yeah. We've always been taught a long time ago, even when we were little kids, that water is sacred. You know, you shouldn't just waste it, you know, because people, you know, now with plastic bottles and stuff like that, we talk about it all the time nowadays too, for our young people, you know. This water is sacred, you know, you need to, you know, if you're not going to use it, then don't take it. Don't, you know, don't take it, you know, don't waste it, you know.
Right.
It's a sacred, it's sacred, you know, it is. It's the giver of life. It's life. If we didn't have water, we wouldn't have life, you know.
Right. Absolutely.
So, and I can almost say that in Ho Chunk, but you know, it's a little bit hard.
You'll get there.
Yeah. Nina, Ni is water, you know, for our in our language. So like Nina over there in
Oh
Lake
yeah.
Winnebago, that's
Yeah.
where that's the water.
I did
Nina
not
is the
know
water.
that.
And then Nikusa, that's like where the water comes from.
Uh-huh.
That's explaining how the water goes from or comes from. So there's a lot of names like that. Nina and Nikusa over there in Wisconsin.
Do you and your wife try to speak Ho-Chunk at home?
We can, yeah. We pray at the table when we have dinner and stuff together. We pray Ho Chunk. My daughter knows how. Everybody knows how. We're teaching
Good.
the grandkids now too.
Good.
We like to talk Ho Chunk to them. You know, we call them by their, you know, their names. You know, the hierarchy and the whatever you call it. You know how the first son, second son, first daughter, third
Mhm.
daughter, whatever. You know, we call them by that. You know,
Okay.
Kunu Hena Haga. You know, Weha, Hinu Weha. You know, all those names for the girls.
Are the
So
grandchildren in the Twin Cities too?
yeah, oh yeah, yep, yep. So I have grandkids there. I have kids that are more Indian than I am because my wife is full blood. You know,
Uh-huh.
so like my daughter and my son, you know, they're 3/4 or more. You know,
Mm-hmm.
but they're only still recognized for like half or not even because of their tribes. You know how they
Right.
are. You know,
That
they
blood
don't recognize.
quantum.
Yeah,
Can't combine it.
yeah. Don't combine it. Yeah, whatever. So yeah, that's what I
Well,
think about that.
is there anything else you would like to share about your experience living in the suburbs, or from our conversation today that we may have missed?
I don't think so. You know, there's so many things I could think about and you know and remember as I go along. You know that all I remember is that you know when I was a kid, we used to just freely go to any of these rivers and creeks and whatever, and we were just found fascinating. You know, to
Mhm.
us. You know, it's like a whole world of discovery. You know, I
Right.
mean, we used to take the crayfish home and eat them. We used to take, you know, fish out of there and eat them. We used to do everything, you know, and I don't know. I mean, a lot of people didn't even know how to do that, you know, that I came in contact with, you know. Hey, you can eat this, you know, you can eat these crayfish. These are good, you know, stuff like that, you know. They didn't even know, you know. So we, you know, those suckers we speared, you know, a lot of people would just throw them on the bank, you know, but no, I took them home. We ate them, you know, we used them, you know. So, and the laws that they have, you know, nowadays, you know, rough fish, you can't throw rough fish back in the water. You have to dispose of them properly and all that stuff, you know. But we used to just leave them lay there, you know, the carp and stuff like that. So I don't know. But nowadays you can't do that anymore. You can't go freely and spear fish and all that,
Right.
and whereas we used to be able to do that when we were kids. We still shoot carp with our bows and stuff, but it's mostly fun,
It was a
So,
good
but
place.
yeah, otherwise, no, I don't have anything else that I can think of.
It was a good place to grow up, it sounds like.
Yeah, we had a good time. I mean, now if you go back to those places where we were when we were kids, they're all developed.
Yeah.
They're all, there's all houses and stuff. Like Eagle Lake, we used to go out to Eagle Lake. There was hardly a house around that area in Maple Grove and stuff. And now there's just tons of houses. It's just covered everywhere you go. Used to be wide open spaces, Highway 169 used to be there, and it wasn't even a highway back then,
And you'd go on your bicycles?
Yeah. I mean, we used to drive over it, and they were constructing freeways and highways and stuff like that,
Look at it now.
None of that stuff was here when we were young, just before we moved here, 35W was completed through the city, That was right before we moved here back in the 60s, So, I mean, I've seen a lot. I've seen a lot. I've seen a lot of change, in my life, in my young life, I guess. I'm getting old now, but, pretty soon, they're going to call me an elder. They already do, but I just I can't live up to that, that name, of an elder, When I go places and stuff, they look at me as an elder because I'm in my 60s now. But, elders get preference for this and that and the other thing, Go to the powwow, you can or you can reserve a camping spot because you're an elder, That's closer to the powwow grounds than the ones far back,
Get some free food.
Yeah. Elders get served first, stuff like that,
You're a young elder.
Yeah, you don't even have to go up to the line and get fed. You can just wait and someone will bring something to you, because they see that, they talk about that. That's a big deal for us nowadays. We teach our children that because there's hardly any respect for people anymore these days. I mean, the respect that we used to have for a lot of people, we teach our kids, talk to your elders and wait on them, ask them if they need anything, stuff like that. When you see them, try to help them, try to do things that are good for them, and teach that to our kids, because that doesn't exist like in society,
Right.
It's just sad, I don't like it, but we try to do our best.
Well, my hope is that with these oral history interviews too, we're collecting the audio recordings and the transcriptions, and they'll go to the archives. So future generations of native folks, but also non-native, can hear these important stories and learn from them down the road. Yeah.
Wash day good.
So thank you so much, Brad.
Thank you for listening. This project may serve as a model for other communities that seek to go beyond land acknowledgement. To learn more about this oral history project, please contact Hennepin History Museum. The project was produced following the standards and principles of the Oral History Association. In addition to this podcast, the interview recordings, transcripts, and narrator files included signed legal released agreements can be found at the Hennepin History Museum. Funding and other support was provided by the St. Anthony's Falls Heritage Board, Hennepin History Museum, Valley Community Presbyterian Church, and the University of Wisconsin. This publication was also made possible in part by the people of Minnesota through a grant funded by an appropriation to the Minnesota Historical Society from the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Any views, findings, opinions, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this publication are those of the authors and do not necessarily represent those of the state of Minnesota, the Minnesota Historical Society, or the Minnesota Historic Resources Advisory Committee. Anaya chopta pecha wopira unkenichiapi. Thank you for listening.